The end of chapter 11 has this sinister picture of Cassius with his glowing eyes. And he said, it's time. So then the question begs to be answered, time for what? What is Cassius up to? Chapter 12, Screams. As always, Sam woke up for his 5:55 a.m. pee. He uncurled from Heidi's inner knee. He slipped from her bed and padded down the stairs and outside through the kitchen dog door. Sam stood on top of the step and sniffed with a distaste the freezing dawn gloom beyond the porch overhang. Winter's first snow was falling fast and thick. How uninviting, he said. He turned and looked at the rows of potted petunias that Uncle Hamish kept safely out of the weather near the warmth of the house. He lifted his leg and watered the one to the far right. It looked the most needy. Returning inside of the kitchen, he was surprised to see Cassius, who normally slept until noon, in his curlers. The poodle trotted up to him with a look of deep concern on his face. There's a crisis, dear Sam. Poor baby Bruno is missing from his crib. Missing? Missing, said Sam. He can't even crawl. Do human babies fly? I fear he's been taken. Go, please check the eastern ridge. I thought I saw a dark figure moving up there through the blizzard. You're better in the snow than me. My fur catches the flakes like Velcro and I freeze into a dogsicle. I'll wake the others. Right! Sam sprang with urgency. He turned and tore back through the kitchen dog door into the driving snow and toward the eastern ridge beyond the aspen grove. He was forced to bound like a rabbit, his short legs struggling in the deepening drifts. He was past the aspens and close to the crest of the ridge before it even occurred to him how preposterous a thing it was that Cassius had just said. Come to think of it, Cassius was built perfectly for bounding in a Vermont blizzard. Plenty of fluff for insulation and pole-like legs. If anyone was suited for becoming a dogsicle in the snow, it was Sam, not Cassius. Just as this bit of obviousness was breaking through the early morning fog of his still sleepy brain, he saw the baby. That's odd. He's out in the snow, so that means where's the baby?
Out in the snow.
That sounds dangerous. As soon as Sam left the house, Cassius turned and loped back behind the kitchen to the cook's quarters. He entered Miss Violet's room and stopped. He could hear the measured breaths of the woman and confirm that she was still asleep. He continued into the adjoining small sewing room that had recently been turned into a nursery for Bruno. He looked at the crib, its front wall hanging down, exposing the empty interior. His chew marks were all around the clasp. Bruno's blankets were ripped apart and strewn about the room just as Cassius had left them moments before. So Cassius is setting the stage. He tore up the baby blanket with his teeth. He chewed on the gate to make the front of the crib come down. So there's chew marks. The blanket's all chewed up. And he just sent Sam out into the snow. Cassius decided that the scene needed a coup de grace, a final colorful brush stroke to the masterpiece. The poodle knelt down and took his right paw into his mouth. He hooked its sharpest tooth between the tough pad and sank it deep into the softer pink flesh below, just enough to break the surface. And then he rose on his hind legs until his front feet lay on the baby's bedding. He held his paw over the white linen adorned with colorful cartoon characters, and he carefully let 3 bright red drops of his own blood fall just to the side of the stuffed bear's head. There's a good picture of Cassius doing his nefarious scheme. Why would Cassius be putting blood into the baby's crib? What would you think if you go to a baby's crib and the baby's not there and there's 3 drops of blood?
I think he's dead.
And a torn up blanket and chew marks on the crib. What is your first thoughts that happened to that baby?
He's dead.
Something happened. Cassius stepped back satisfied. He looked toward the still sleeping Miss Violet in the adjoining room. He set his feet wide. He arched his back. He adopted a convincing expression of alarm on his bony face. Then he began barking. Arr, 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 arr. Miss Violet's screams started very soon after. Chapter 13. At the top of the eastern ridge, Sam looked down through the blowing snow at the bundle of blankets tucked into a small blueberry bush. With a long nose, he prodded the folds until Bruno's little face emerged. The baby yawned, stretched, and looked at Sam. He smiled as the snow tickled his nose. Sam was confused, but only for a second, for his own nose had picked up a familiar scent. As he pushed the blanket open, a scent easily identified in a house with only 2 dogs. Cassius. His mouth, his saliva, his hairspray. The morning fog suddenly cleared in the dachshund's now racing brain. The fur along his backbone stood up as the final scent he sniffed overwhelmed his senses. Danger. What Sam didn't sense at that moment was that the threat wasn't to baby Bruno, but to himself. Sam pulled the blanket folds back over the face of the giggling Bruno. He grasped the material and pulled the heavy bundle from the bush and onto the soft snow, and then he heard Cassius barking. Turning at the sound, he saw Miss Violet in the distance, stumbling up the ridge and through the storm toward him. Behind her came Uncle Hamish and Heidi, everyone in their nightclothes despite the cold, but Cassius was ahead of them all, barking, baying. He would reach Sam and the baby in seconds. One thought crowded out all others of the dachshund's brain, still churning, trying to make sense of it all. Keep the baby away from Cassius. Sam spun and ran down the opposite side of the ridge, his neck muscles bulging as he struggled to keep his head high, the bundled baby dangling under his mouth. Miss Violet saw this and, "Oh, my baby!" screamed again. Behind her, Heidi and her uncle pushed through the snow with frantic urgency. "Sam! Sam, what are you doing? Sam!" screamed Heidi, her voice hysterical and breaking from a swirling mix of confusion and fear. Sam reached a low stone wall which blocked further retreat. He set baby Bruno carefully against the wall and turned to face the quickly closing Cassius. Violet, Hamish, and Heidi reached the top of the ridge and looked down on the 2 dogs now facing off. Sam was outmatched and he knew it. The poodle was 5 times his size and weight. The little dog planted his feet wide, placing himself between Cassius and the child. He put his head low. "I don't understand any of this," Sam said, "but I know you're not touching the baby again." "Yes," said Cassius, slowly, evenly, "I am." So let's paint the picture here. Sam's out in the snow, rescuing the baby, finds the baby, puts the baby's wrappings in his mouth, and he's bounding through the snow, carrying the baby to safety, right? He's protecting the baby from Cassius. But how does it look to Heidi and Hamish?
It looks like Sam is trying to do it.
It looks like Sam's trying to steal the baby, right?
But
Because they're running and Sam's running and he's like, they're chasing me and he's trying to run from them.
But then actually, he's trying to protect the baby.
But do they know that? For all they know, baby's gone. There's blood in the crib. The blanket's been torn up. There's chew marks on the crib. And they go outside and here's Sam with the baby in his mouth, like in the wrappings, and he's running away. They don't speak dog, so they don't know what's really going on. Cassius has set Sam up. Sam locked terrified eyes at Cassius, his lips curling high in anger for the first time in his brief life. He spat forth a vicious snarl, punctuated by barks and the snapping of his teeth that echoed through the small valley. And it was here in a distant icy meadow below a black sky at the dawn of a terrible day that Sam would demonstrate the other thing besides kisses that dogs uniquely offer people willingly: their lives. But the people watching from the ridge above that day didn't see this. All they saw was a crazed, probably very ill dachshund intent on killing an infant and threatening anyone that would stop him. Cassius stepped towards Sam, who made a lunge at the big dog before spinning around to move back toward baby Bruno, where he would make his last stand. And that is when Uncle Hamish raised his rifle and fired. we'll stop there for today.